Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Today is the feast of Our Lady of Fatima, and because of that, we're joined by a friend, Dr. Mark Miravalle, who is a Mariologist from Franciscan University of Steubenville, professor in numerous other institutions, including my alma mater, Ave Maria University. And he's joining us to talk about the apparition in general, but also its effects on the West and the world. Mark, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm well. Happy feast day, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, happy feast day. I'm really glad to be able to connect with you. So let's begin with... I know your work enough to know that Fatima has a bit of a special place in your heart in terms of an apparition, but also in terms of your devotion to the Rosary. So maybe that might be a good place to begin. Share your personal connection with the apparition.
Well, sure. I mean, Fatima is, it's at once historic and Copernican, and at the same time, it's very personal. And that's how it is to me as well. I mean, I started writing pieces on Our Lady in my early 20s, and the first piece I wrote on was Fatima. I was actually a student at the Angelicum overseas, getting my doctorate. And I mean, I think you can also, Marcus, make a case that Fatima is kind of the mother apparition of the Age of Mary, and I say that for this reason, that all the apparitions that come before Fatima, starting with the Miraculous Medal onward, seem to lead up to it, and every authentic apparition since Fatima really seeks to fulfill it, and that's an effort to bring forward the triumphs of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which is so founded on that, kind of timeless promise, which we hope truly does happen in time, and that is, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. So I think Fatima is that massive. I know a previous ambassador from the Philippines to the Vatican asked Cardinal Ratzinger, Howard D. was a dear friend. He said, Cardinal, Your Eminence, why is there not an encyclical on Fatima? And Cardinal Ratzinger at the time answered, well, to do an encyclical on Fatima, you'd have to do an encyclical on the Gospel. And I think that's how massive the Fatima message is, both historically and for the present time.
What are some of the core elements of the Fatima message?
Well, first of all, I think you have to land with her title. I mean, she doesn't call herself Our Lady of Fatima. She calls herself Our Lady of the Rosary. So the call to pray the Rosary every day, which is a call not just for personal holiness, which is very important in certain regards first, but it's to bring peace to the world. It's important that we remember Fatima is happening during the global train wreck of World War I. And in fact, Pope Benedict XV, the Pope at the time, had just offered a prayer in the Vatican in May of 2017, asking Our Lady to intercede for peace in the world. And a couple of months later, or actually 10 days later, Our Lady comes forward. So it's first of all Rosary. Secondly, it's this general call of what I call co-redemption, that we're supposed to offer our prayers and sacrifices in union with Jesus and Our Lady to save souls. And that's something that the kids get, the Fatima visionaries get, even from the Archangel St. Michael before Our Lady appears. Thirdly, there's consecration to her Immaculate Heart as a historic remedy that Russia and by extension via John Paul II, the whole world was consecrated to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart, again, to bring peace. And then I think lastly, although there's so much more, the 5 first Saturdays of reparation. There's this incredible promise that Our Lady, as mediatrix of all graces, will bring us graces necessary for salvation if we, in fact, on 5 consecutive first Saturdays, pray the Rosary, go to confession, receive Holy Communion, and do 15 minutes of meditation, all with the intention of making reparation to her Immaculate Heart. So it's an extremely pregnant Marian message.
And it's been extremely pivotal as well, historically attested, including the miracles. I wonder if we can just briefly explore that.
Well, surely. I mean, it starts, of course, with the October 13, 1917 solar miracle witnessed by 70,000, testified by agnostic and atheist reporters from the Lisbon Mason Run paper, saying this is something that cannot be denied. Even physiological elements that when the sun comes to the earth, and people, their clothes were wet because many of them had prostrated, thinking that perhaps it was the end of the world. That as the sun, comes back after its glorious dance, the clothes are dry, and those are the phenomena that are trying to give credibility to the message. And then, of course, there's been just hundreds of miracles, spiritual first, then also physical miracles attributed with visits to the Cova de Aria, the shrine there in the center of the Fatima piazza. So, and then you even have, of course, what I think also fits under this category, you have the miracle of the Berlin Wall falling. Mm-hmm. And I say that because right there in the Fatima Square, you have a big chunk of the Berlin Wall as a result of John Paul II consecrating the world, inclusive of Russia, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary on March 25th of 1984. And as a result, without major violence, the Berlin Wall falls. Now, I'm of the age of realizing and remembering that Berlin Wall stood for, it was a concrete icon of the impenetrability of communism. Mm-hmm. And then, without major military action or firing, and that's why it's seen as a miracle of Fatima initiated by St. John Paul II.
Even if we look at Portugal proper, in 1910, Portugal had undergone a republican revolution, and so you had a public regime that was actively seizing church property. It was trying to secularize education. It was trying to stifle the authority of the Catholic Church. Explain the impact of the Fatima apparition on Portugal in this time.
Well, in fact, the children, risked imprisonment just by going outside and doing a, quote, public religious event, because that was how limited the Masonic hold on the church was. It was total persecution. I mean, it could be likened to what the church in Mexico experienced during the 1910s and leading into the 1920s. I mean, it was a holistic attack on the church. And so the fact that 3 children were undermining in the minds of the authorities this regime takeover, but in fact, as heaven always uses the humble to, confound and defeat the proud, these 3 children, really Our Lady, of course, brought forward so many pilgrims that it was simply beyond the abilities of the local government to contain it. And that's just the socio-political, geographic dimension. The real dimension is the conversions that came forward, including some of the Masonic police that came there to try to prevent things. So, I mean, you really have this grace explosion that comes out of Fatima that first affects Portugal, and ironically, the place Our Lady says, would kind of experience a special peace. And of course, Portugal's one of the only countries in Europe that do not enter World War II. And then the bigger prophecies that come forward in terms of communism spreading its errors throughout the world, to which historians laughed at. They said, this is ridiculous. I mean, Russia can't even feed its own people. They're not going to threaten the world. And yet these prophecies all came true. So both locally, nationally, and globally, the Fatima message has a major historic and supernatural impact.
And that supernatural impact has to be contrasted with the historical reality. The same year of the Fatima apparition is the year the Russian Revolution began, and there's no way around it. We can pretend it was a political revolution, but really it was an atheistic religious revolution against the Christian heritage of Russia and the West.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, you've got to dig deeper down below just the political faces of these movements. Leninism and Stalinism later were atheism contrived, and Our Lady of Fatima will defeat that.
Yeah. My guest is Dr. Mark Miravalle. He is a Mariologist affiliated with the Franciscan University of Steubenville, but also with Ave Maria University, and we are talking about the Fatima apparitions, today being the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima. Blessed feast day. Stay tuned. Continuing on the other side, I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Pete. I'm talking with Dr. Mark Miravalle. He is a Mariologist with Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ave Maria University. He joins us on this great feast day of Our Lady of Fatima to talk about the impact of the apparition of our Blessed Virgin Mother in Fatima. Mark, you were talking earlier about how communism arose as a religious revolt, and we don't want to overemphasize the socio-political history of what was going on, but I do want to ask if you could speak to the fact that with the First World War, we were beginning to see all of the social and global structures that Christendom had built start to be broken down, and therefore we're getting the rise of this atheism. And so Mary appearing there was a kind of divine pillar to uphold what was true, good, and beautiful about the Catholic faith.
Yeah, that's completely true. I mean, in short, the effects of World War I left a global pessimism, a real sense of hopelessness. There were great numbers of suicides and a great downtrodden in culture and art and architecture. I mean, it was holistic. It was existential. And in the middle of this, the mother comes, like she's done so many times in history. Like she came in the 3rd century during the Roman persecutions. Like she came in 71 with Lepanto. Like she came in 1683 with the Battle of Vienna. That's her role as advocate. She comes when we need her the most, and we needed her the most in 1917. So she comes, and here you have this incredible battle. It's really Genesis 3:15 and Revelations 12:1 brought to the present. It's the battle between God's greatest creature and his most heinous creature. So God's greatest creature comes to these 3 kids in Fatima. God's most heinous creature, I'm sorry to say, was at the base of this atheistic rejection of Christianity, which would lead to somewhere between 80 and 120 million people dying in the 20th century as the ill fruit of communism. Now, that's simply a dark and devious reality. So here you have, the light coming through the mother to the children, and even literally at times where she'd open her hands and the kids would be filled with light, versus the darkness that was just attacking the 20th century. And that's why when John Paul II, who of course was shot on this day in 1981, you have just an icon of that, right? This incredible Pope Saint, brilliant yet with a beautiful heart and loving the world and calling for consecration. And then an assassination attempt, which pretty reliable evidence links back to the Soviet Union of the time. So here you go. It's that same battle between the woman and the serpent. And that's why Fatima is quintessentially relevant to today, because as we all know, that battle's still going on in a raging fashion. And that's why the rosary, consecration to her Immaculate Heart, doing penance and offering it, and what St. Michael told the kids, especially the things you cannot change. I mean, how many things, Marcus, are beyond our ability to change, but they can still be supernaturally fruitful? That's co-redemption. So the Fatima message is so utterly relevant to right now, as we're facing some, I think, unprecedented waters, but that's why we lean into and hope for and work for the triumph of her Immaculate Heart.
Can you please tell us about the structure of the 3 secrets? There's unfortunately way too much of a mystical or mysticist speculation on them, but there's a practical reality to how we can view them.
Yeah, certainly. And it's important to note that when Cardinal Ratzinger released the 3rd secret at the request of St. John Paul II, he said clearly there's not an official interpretation of the 3rd secret. So this was all revealed back on July 13th, 1917, arguably the single most important message of the whole 20th century, because Our Lady calls for the praying of the Rosary, that God has established, God wills to establish devotion to her Immaculate Heart as the remedy. So this happens after Secret 1, the vision of hell. And so these three children see hell. Why? Because Our Lady likes scaring little children? Of course not, because we need to know hell is a reality. Mm-hmm. And then she chases that immediately with, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. So that's the God-given remedy. So when people say, too much Mary, you're talking too much Mary, you got to read the ink. It's God who asks that we have this devotion to her Immaculate Heart. Then you have the series of prophecies, which include a conditional Second World War, the spreading of communism. The Holy Father would have much to suffer, which in fact, was fulfilled in a very concrete way on May 13th, 1981. And then one part, quite frankly, Marcus, that we tend to skip over and forget, and that is she predicts the annihilation of nations. Well, that has not happened yet. That didn't happen during World War II. You had border changes, you had different names, but you didn't have a nation here and then it's gone. That's what annihilation means, being brought to nihil. And so that's still a critical part of it. Now, the third secret, the third part of all of this, was revealed in June of the year 2000. And it speaks about, a bishop dressed in white, which Sister Lucia identifies as the person of John Paul II, and talks about him going up a hill. There's a number of martyrdoms. The blood of the martyrs is sprinkled. And again, while there's many possible interpretations of this, it's very clear, according to John Paul and Pope Benedict, that this is not in the past. This is not just a testimony of what happened in the 50s, that there's still relevance to the Fatima message, and some of these elements have yet to be fulfilled. Therefore, the call to do our part, to do our rosaries, to perpetually do the 5 first Saturdays of reparation, not just after we get our promise of grace, but because we know Our Lady's heart is suffering. And that also is something that's so important at Fatima. We're called to offer reparation to her heart because her heart is mystically suffering right now because of the sins of her children.
The fact that all of this happens just on the eve of what now history remembers as the Bolshevik Revolution, or just before the Bolshevik Revolution, I should say, is stunning and telling for us, because God was showing that my presence is in the world despite the worst contraptions and machinations of man. So in that light, can you please speak to the conversions, the spiritual fruit, the staying power, not just of this apparition, but then the hold of the Catholic faith in Europe and the world?
Yeah, I think it's hard to underestimate the effect of Fatima on the 20th century. I mean, I would hate to think, now again, always in proper distinction and perspective, now Fatima is a private revelation. Technically, we don't need to believe in Fatima at all to be a good Catholic. Practically, I would shudder to think of the 20th century without the gift of Fatima. The Church would continue, granted, but it is it's an existential grace for so many. So what happens immediately is you have people who again return to the Rosary. They start looking up, Marcus, instead of just horizontally. I mean, quite frankly, even the architecture, when buildings were being built, and even churches built as bowling alleys because it seemed to say there was no real hope. No, Fatima gets us to look up, to trust in the Mother because God has sent her as remedy. And I mean, who could possibly count the number of rosaries and conversions returned to the prayer and sacramental life of the Church, which of course is always what the Mother's trying to get us to do. That's why she always asks for a church to be built at these places. So she can bring us into a greater love of the Eucharist, frequent confession. That's not arbitrary, that's part of the 5 first Saturdays. So you got to go to confession. And so these are all things getting us into the heart of the prayer and sacramental life of the Church. Now, I would also say that there's plenty of reason, I believe, in the present and the future, to hold on dearly to the Fatima message and to continue to incorporating it, especially the power of the Rosary. The Rosary can change the course of human history. But although we're not in World War I right now, we're facing our own challenges in the present day that should make Fatima all the more relevant, and to continue to issue this. I don't think anybody would say, reading today's headlines, I think, the Immaculate Heart has triumphed and we are now in an era of peace. And that should just encourage us to say, no, we've got more to do in terms of cooperating with Our Lady of Fatima.
we'd be remiss if we didn't briefly touch on St. John Paul II and his attempted assassination.
Certainly. I mean, how can that be coincidence? May
Yeah.
13th, 1981, with the prophecy that in the future the Holy Father will have much to suffer. And, so the Holy Father is shot. And once again, there's credible evidence that this was organized via, Armenia, but by the Soviet Union at the time. And the Holy Father, in his honesty, says, I don't know much about Fatima. I was kind of an Our Lady of Czestochowa boy. That was my Marian devotion. So he reads about Fatima, and then he gets the conviction that he's called to consecrate the world, inclusive of Russia, to the Immaculate Heart. And of course, he does that on March 25th, 1984. How do we know? Because Sister Lucia, in 6 separate public interviews, said, it has been done. It has been satisfied. So you don't want to take a position opposed to the Fatima Pope, John Paul II, and the Fatima visionary, Sister Lucia. It doesn't mean that we rest our laurels now, but St. John Paul II is simply the Pope of Fatima. And obviously his intercession, I believe, continues to seek to have the Church on a message obedient to prayer and penance and consecration of the Immaculate Heart of Mary and hitting the beads, keeping our rosaries going.
Mark, thank you so very much. These 2 segments were delightful. Thank you for your time.
It's a total grace. God bless you. Happy feast day again.
My guest has been Dr. Mark Miravalle. He's a Mariologist with Franciscan University and Ave Maria University. And we've been talking about the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima. Pray your rosary. Give your life to the Immaculate Heart. I'm Marcus Peter.